Get off my aircraft before I have you arrested for trespassing." The words sliced through the humid Miami air like a blade sharp enough to stop every conversation on the rain-soaked tarmac of Opa-locka Executive Airport. It was 4:23 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Captain Jake Morrison stood at the bottom of the stairs leading to an $85 million Gulfstream G650ER. His silver hair perfectly styled despite the storm, his uniform pressed to military precision. He was pointing an accusing finger at a young black woman in a faded university hoodie jeans and muddy sneakers. She stood completely still in the rain water dripping from her hood, clutching a worn backpack against her chest. Her name was Sierra Campbell, and she looked absolutely nothing like what Captain Morrison expected a billionaire to look like. What Morrison didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly imagined as he blocked her path to the aircraft stairs, was that the signature on his paycheck belonged to the same woman he was now threatening to have arrested. He didn't know that in exactly 52 minutes, his 20-year aviation career would be over, his reputation destroyed, and his arrogance would become a viral cautionary tale watched by millions. Before we dive into this incredible story of prejudice, power, and the ultimate reversal of fortune, I want to connect with you. Tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before you even opened your mouth? If so, react with an airplane emoji. And if this story moves you even a little bit, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to witness will change how you think about assumptions forever. Picture this: the private aviation district of Miami, where the wealthy and powerful come to escape the crowds, the delays and the indignities of commercial flight. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the tarmac into a mirror that reflected the gray October sky. Hangars stretched across the horizon like monuments to wealth-housing aircraft worth more than most people's houses. The smell of jet fuel mixed with the ozone of the approaching storm. In the distance, the Gulfstream G650ER gleamed despite the weather, its white fuselage and gold trim making it look like something from a movie. This wasn't just any private jet. This was the ultimate in luxury aviation, capable of flying non-stop from Miami to London with a range that could take you anywhere in the world without a fuel stop. The interior was custom designed with Italian leather, rare wood veneers, and technology that would make a tech billionaire jealous. Standing guard at the base of the aircraft stairs were two people who believed they owned the sky. What they didn't know was that the woman in the hoodie actually did. What they couldn't see past their own prejudice was that she wasn't lost, she wasn't confused, and she certainly wasn't trespassing. She was coming home to an aircraft she had personally designed, personally funded, and personally owned. The power dynamic seemed obvious: uniformed authority versus someone who looked like she had wandered off from a college campus. But appearances, as Captain Morrison was about to learn in the most humiliating way possible, can be devastatingly deceiving. What they didn't know was that the signature on their paychecks, the authority that hired them, fired them, and controlled every aspect of their careers, belonged to the woman standing in the rain. Sierra Campbell had been awake for 52 hours straight, and it showed. At 28, she was the youngest pharmaceutical executive to ever successfully shepherd a revolutionary Alzheimer's treatment through FDA approval, a process that had just concluded in a marathon hearing in Washington, D.C. Her company, Campbell Pharmaceuticals, was valued at over $6 billion, making her personal net worth hover around $2.1 billion. But you wouldn't know any of that looking at her now. She wore her old University of Miami hoodie, the one she'd had since she was an undergraduate, surviving on ramen noodles and determination. Her jeans were designer, but they looked like any other pair of jeans, and her sneakers were soaked through from the unexpected Miami downpour. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry except for a simple watch that had belonged to her foster mother. She looked exactly like what she was, a brilliant woman, who valued substance over style, intelligence over image. The backpack she clutched contained a laptop worth $50,000 and documents that represented breakthrough research worth hundreds of millions. But Sierra had learned early in life that announcing your value was a sign of insecurity. True power, she believed, didn't need to announce itself. It demonstrated itself when necessary. Growing up in the foster care system had taught Sierra that people would underestimate her based on her age, her race, her background, and her appearance. She had been moved from home to home until she was 18, each family seeing her as either a problem to be managed or a paycheck to be collected. But every underestimation had become fuel for her determination. Every person who said she couldn't, wouldn't, or didn't belong somewhere became motivation to prove them catastrophically wrong. Her philosophy was simple: never announce your power, demonstrate it when necessary. She had built her empire quietly, methodically, and with a fierce intelligence that had revolutionized pharmaceutical research. She didn't drive flashy cars, she didn't wear designer clothes as status symbols, and she didn't surround herself with an entourage. She moved through the world with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was, and didn't need external validation to prove it. Captain Jake Morrison, 45, stood 6 feet tall with the kind of presence that commanded attention in any room. His silver hair was styled with military precision. His jaw was square and strong, and his uniform was pressed to perfection. He had 20 years of aviation experience, first in the military and then in private charter, and he commanded a salary of $350,000 a year to fly the wealthy and powerful around the world. But Morrison had a problem. He had started to believe that flying for billionaires made him elite by association. He wore his uniform like armor, stood with the posture of someone who believed his authority was absolute, and spoke with the confidence of a man who had never been challenged by anyone who mattered. His fatal flaw was assuming that worth could be measured by appearance, that status could be determined by clothing, and that his authority extended beyond the cockpit into judging who deserved respect. Morrison's bitterness had grown over the years. He had watched countless passengers board aircraft worth more than he would earn in a lifetime, and somewhere along the way he had started to resent being in service to people he perceived as beneath him intellectually but above him financially. He had developed a keen eye, he thought, for spotting people who didn't belong in his world. He could tell real wealth from fake wealth, he believed, just by looking at someone. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. Isabella Vasquez was 31 years old and looked like she had stepped out of a luxury magazine. Her long, dark hair was always perfectly styled. Her red lipstick was applied with artistic precision, and her flight attendant uniform was tailored to accentuate every curve. She moved with the grace of someone who knew she was being watched, spoke with the confidence of someone who had learned that her appearance opened doors, and carried herself like someone who believed beauty was a form of currency. Isabella had 180,000 Instagram followers who watched her document the luxury lifestyle of private aviation. She posted pictures from exotic destinations, videos of herself serving champagne to celebrities, and carefully curated content that made it seem like she lived in the same world as her wealthy passengers, rather than simply serving them. She wore designer accessories, expensive perfume, and carried herself with an elegance that she believed made her untouchable. Her fatal flaw was assuming that attractive privilege granted her power over people she perceived as less fortunate. She had learned to use her beauty as a weapon and her sexuality as a tool, and she had never encountered a situation where those advantages didn't serve her. She photographed and filmed everything, believing that her social media presence made her important, that her followers made her powerful, and that her appearance made her invulnerable. She was about to discover that all of those assumptions were dangerously wrong. 24-year-old Tyler Rodriguez was having the kind of day that social media creators dream about. The Hispanic entrepreneur had built a following of 2.8 million on TikTok by creating aviation content that made private flying accessible to people who would never experience it themselves. His channel at skyhigh_Tyler featured behind-the-scenes looks at private jets, interviews with pilots, and viral videos that had made him the unofficial voice of aviation social media. Tyler was at Opa-locka waiting for his own charter flight. He was flying a tech startup CEO to a conference in Atlanta, a client who paid him handsomely to document their journey for social media marketing. But as he watched the drama unfolding 50 yards away at the Gulfstream, Tyler's content creator instincts kicked in. He could smell a story from a mile away, and what he was witnessing had all the elements of viral gold conflict, authority prejudice, and what looked like a massive power imbalance. Tyler began filming discreetly from his position near the FBO terminal, his phone capturing everything while he provided live commentary to his followers. "Yo," he whispered into his camera, "something is about to go down at Opa-locka right now, and you are not ready for what I think is about to happen. We got Captain Perfect over here trying to kick off what looks like a college student, but something about this whole situation feels off. Stay with me." Within minutes, Tyler had switched to live streaming as his follower count climbed and viewers began flooding the comments with reactions. Aviation professionals, social justice advocates, and curious observers began sharing the stream, creating a real-time audience that would serve as witness to everything that was about to unfold. Amanda Foster, 52, was the kind of wealthy socialite who had grown accustomed to private aviation as a basic necessity rather than a luxury. She was waiting for her own flight to the Hamptons, standing under the covered area near the FBO entrance, dressed in elegant casual wear that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Initially, Amanda found herself agreeing with the flight crew's assessment of the situation. The woman in the hoodie did look out of place. She did seem like she might be confused or lost, and Amanda's first instinct was to assume the crew knew what they were doing. Luis Martinez, 35, was the ground crew supervisor who had worked at Opa-locka for 12 years. He had seen every kind of passenger, every kind of drama, and every kind of misunderstanding that could happen in private aviation. As he watched the confrontation escalate, something in his experienced gut told him that the crew was making a serious mistake. He had seen enough real wealth to know that it didn't always announce itself with designer labels and flashy accessories. Dr. Patricia Williams, 48, was a medical professional heading to a conference in Boston. She had earned her way into private aviation through her success as a cardiovascular surgeon, and she understood what it meant to be underestimated because of her appearance or background. As she watched the situation unfold, her sense of justice was activated. Regardless of who the woman in the hoodie was or what she could afford, Dr. Williams could see that the situation was escalating beyond professional courtesy into something that looked suspiciously like discrimination. Tyler's live stream was climbing toward 15,000 viewers as word spread across social media platforms. Comments were flooding in from around the world with hashtags beginning to form organically. #PrivateJetDrama, #Aviation, Karen, #Opa-locka Scandal. Other passengers were beginning to notice the commotion and pull out their own phones, creating multiple angles of documentation that would make it impossible for anyone to later claim the incident never happened or had been misrepresented. Isabella, oblivious to the fact that she was being filmed by multiple people, continued to document what she thought was an amusing encounter with someone who didn't belong in her world. She had no idea that her own footage would become evidence of her unprofessional conduct, that her mocking commentary would be preserved forever, and that her Instagram followers were about to witness the destruction of everything she had built her identity around. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the worst kind of prejudice, reveal the dangerous assumptions that people make about worth and status, and demonstrate what happens when someone with real power is underestimated by people who mistake authority for actual influence. Multiple cameras were rolling, thousands of people were watching live, and none of the key players except Tyler understood that they were about to become the center of a global conversation about respect, dignity, and the consequences of judging people by their appearance. Sierra approached the aircraft with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was going. She pulled her phone from her pocket and opened the email containing her boarding confirmation, the manifest details, and the flight plan she had approved that morning. She had every document she needed to prove her identity and her right to board the aircraft, but she had hoped it wouldn't be necessary. She had hoped she could simply board her own plane without having to justify her existence to people who worked for her. Captain Morrison's Sierra said calmly, her voice cutting through the sound of rain hitting the tarmac. "I'm Sierra Campbell. I believe you're expecting me." Jake Morrison looked her up and down with undisguised contempt. He saw the hoodie, the jeans, the sneakers, the backpack, and the complete absence of any visible wealth indicators. He saw a young black woman who looked like she had wandered away from a college campus, and his mind immediately categorized her as someone who didn't belong in his world. "Service entrance for maintenance is around back," Morrison said, his voice dripping with dismissive authority. "You're at the wrong plane, sweetheart. The cleaning crew doesn't board until after the passengers." Sierra's expression didn't change, but something hardened behind her eyes. She had heard variations of this assumption before at medical conferences, in boardrooms, at exclusive restaurants, and at private events. People looked at her and saw what they expected to see rather than who she actually was. "I'm not maintenance, Sierra," replied her voice, remaining calm and professional. "I'm your passenger. Check your manifest." Before Morrison could respond, Isabella Vasquez emerged from the aircraft, drawn by the sound of raised voices. She descended the stairs with the graceful confidence of someone who knew she looked stunning. Her red lipstick perfect despite the humidity, her uniform tailored to accentuate her figure. She took one look at Sierra and let out a laugh that was both cruel and dismissive. Sweetie Isabella said, her voice carrying the kind of condescending tone that suggested she was talking to a child. "This is a Gulfstream G650ER, not a Greyhound bus. The staff shuttle picks up by Terminal 2. You're obviously confused about where you're supposed to be." Tyler, still filming from his position near the terminal, whispered into his camera. "Oh no, she did not just say that. Did y'all hear that? This is about to get real ugly real fast. Something tells me they have no idea who they're talking to." Sierra pulled her phone out again and showed the screen to Morrison. "This is my boarding confirmation. This is my flight manifest. This is my aircraft. Now may I please board?" Morrison didn't even look at the phone. He crossed his arms over his chest and stepped directly into Sierra's path, physically blocking her access to the aircraft stairs. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. "People who can afford this aircraft don't show up looking like they crawled out of a homeless shelter. I've been flying private for 20 years, and I can spot a con artist from a mile away." Captain Morrison Sierra said, her voice still eerily calm despite the escalating hostility. "You're making a career-ending mistake right now." Morrison laughed, a sound that carried no humor whatsoever. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can con your way onto a billionaire's jet. I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but it ends here." Isabella had pulled out her own phone and was now filming Sierra, narrating for her Instagram stories. "Y'all, you will not believe what's happening at the airport right now. Some girl is trying to sneak onto a private jet, probably hoping to get content for her social media. Like, sweetie, we can see you. This is not how you get famous." Dr. Patricia Williams, who had been watching the exchange from the covered waiting area, stepped forward. Her medical training had taught her to assess situations quickly and intervene when she saw something dangerous developing. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to, but regardless of what the situation is here, there's no need for anyone to be blocking anyone's path or raising their voices. Morrison turned toward Dr. Williams with the same dismissive attitude he had shown Sierra. "Ma'am, this is a private matter involving aircraft security. I need you to step back and let me handle this." "What I see," Dr. Williams replied, "is a crew member refusing to verify a passenger's credentials and instead making assumptions based on appearance. That's not security protocol. That's something else entirely." Luis Martinez, the ground crew supervisor, had been watching the exchange from his position near the fuel truck. His 12 years of experience at Opa-locka had taught him to recognize when situations were spiraling out of control. He approached the group with the careful diplomatic stance of someone who had mediated countless airport disputes. "Maybe we should just check the manifest," Luis suggested, his voice reasonable and calm. "It would take 30 seconds to verify everything and resolve this peacefully." Morrison whirled on Luis with barely contained rage. "I don't need to check anything." "Look at her." He gestured at Sierra's appearance with disgust. "Does she look like someone who owns an $85 million aircraft? Does anything about her suggest she belongs in first-class anything?" Tyler's live stream had now reached 25,000 viewers, with comments flowing so fast they were impossible to read. Aviation professionals around the world were watching in horror. Passengers were sharing their own experiences with discrimination, and social media was beginning to pick up the hashtags that were forming organically around the incident. Sierra reached into her backpack slowly and deliberately. Every movement was careful, controlled, and witnessed by multiple cameras. She wasn't reaching for anything dangerous, but she was reaching for something that would change everything. Captain Morrison, Sierra said, "I'm going to give you one more chance to step aside and allow me to board my aircraft. If you continue to refuse, the consequences will be swift, severe, and permanent." Morrison stepped closer, invading Sierra's personal space in a way that was clearly intended to intimidate. "Are you threatening me? Because if you are, I'll have you arrested for threatening a flight crew member. That's a federal crime, sweetheart." "I'm not threatening you," Sierra replied, her voice dropping to a level that somehow carried more menace than shouting would have. "I'm warning you. There's a difference." Isabella was still filming, completely oblivious to the fact that she was documenting her own professional destruction. "This is content gold," she whispered to her phone camera. "Delusional people thinking they can intimidate their way onto private aircraft. Hashtag busted fraud is about to trend." What none of them knew, what they couldn't have imagined as they continued to escalate the confrontation, was that Tyler's live stream was being watched by aviation industry professionals who recognized the aircraft's tail number, by pharmaceutical industry executives who knew exactly who Sierra Campbell was, and by social media influencers who understood that they were witnessing the kind of viral moment that would define careers and destroy reputations. The rain continued to fall. The tension continued to build, and Sierra Campbell continued to stand in the storm with the patience of someone who knew that justice was about to be served with devastating precision. Sierra's hand moved slowly into her backpack, and every person with a camera trained on her held their breath. The leather portfolio she withdrew was worn but expensive, the kind of executive folder that suggested serious business rather than flashy displays of wealth. She opened it with deliberate care, her movements captured by multiple angles as Tyler's live stream count climbed past 30,000 viewers. "Captain Morrison, Sierra," said her voice, carrying a finality that made several onlookers step closer. "I want you to read line 6 of this document." She held out the aircraft registration papers, the official FAA documentation that established legal ownership of the Gulfstream G650ER. Morrison glanced at it dismissively, his face showing the kind of contempt reserved for what he assumed were obviously forged documents. "Fake papers," Morrison scoffed. "Lady, I've seen this scam 100 times. Anyone can print official-looking documents. You probably downloaded a template off the internet and filled in some numbers. Isabella laughed from behind her phone camera, still filming what she thought was an entertaining encounter with a delusional wannabe. Right. Like, do you really think we've never seen fake documents before? This is amateur hour. Sierra's expression didn't change. She had expected this response. In fact, she had counted on their arrogance preventing them from actually examining the evidence in front of them. Read line 6. Captain. Out loud. For the cameras. Tyler zoomed in with his phone, his commentary providing real-time analysis for his growing audience. Y'all, she's asking him to read it out loud. That's either the move of someone who's completely delusional or someone who knows exactly what those papers say. I'm betting on option 2. Morrison finally looked down at the document, his eyes scanning the page with the kind of cursory glance designed to confirm his existing assumptions rather than discover new information. But as his eyes reached line 6, something shifted in his expression. The color began to drain from his face as he read the words that would end his career. Owner Campbell Pharmaceuticals Holdings, LLC. Primary shareholder Sierra Campbell. Aircraft designation, corporate transport executive use only. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Tyler's live stream erupted with comments as viewers who understood the implications began typing furiously. Aviation professionals, pharmaceutical industry insiders, and business news followers were recognizing the name and the company, and the chat was exploding with information about Sierra's net worth, her company's valuation, and her recent FDA approval success. Morrison's hands began to shake slightly as the full weight of what he was reading sank in. But his pride, his arrogance, and his inability to accept that he had been catastrophically wrong prevented him from backing down. Anyone can print a fake document, he said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments earlier. This proves nothing. Sierra reached for her phone and dialed a number on speaker. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. Campbell Holdings Legal Department, this is Sarah Martinez speaking. Sarah, this is Sierra Campbell. Sierra said, her voice carrying across the tarmac through the phone's speaker. I need immediate verification of aircraft tail number N850SC. Can you confirm ownership and registration details? Yes, ma'am, the voice replied without hesitation. N850SC is your Gulfstream G650ER. Purchased March 2023. Customized interior registered to Campbell Pharmaceuticals. Holdings with you as primary operator. Is there an issue with the aircraft, Ms. Campbell? The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison's face had gone completely white. Isabella had stopped filming her phone, lowering as the implications of what she had just heard began to sink in. Amanda Foster stepped closer, her expression shifting from dismissive to concerned as she realized she had been witnessing something far more serious than a simple misunderstanding. Tyler's live stream had now reached 40,000 viewers, with the chat moving so fast it was a blur of shocked reactions, aviation industry commentary, and people tagging friends to watch the unfolding drama. The hashtags #PrivateJetJustice and #SierraStrong were beginning to trend as the video was shared across multiple platforms. No issue with the aircraft. Sarah Sierra said into the phone, her eyes never leaving Morrison's face. Just a crew member who apparently needs clarification about who signs his paycheck. I can connect you with human resources immediately if there's a personnel issue, ma'am. That won't be necessary just yet, Sierra replied. But please make a note that we may need to discuss some staffing changes shortly. Sierra ended the call and looked directly at Morrison. The rain was still falling, but the dynamic on the tarmac had shifted completely. The woman who had been dismissed as a confused college student who had been mocked for her appearance and threatened with arrest was now revealed to be exactly what she had claimed to be: the owner of the aircraft, the employer of the crew, and the person with the power to end careers with a single phone call. My name is Sierra Campbell, she said, her voice carrying across the tarmac with absolute authority. I am the founder and CEO of Campbell Pharmaceuticals. This is my $85 million aircraft, and you just spent the last 20 minutes assaulting and humiliating your employer." Isabella's phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the wet tarmac. The video she had been filming, the mocking commentary she had been providing, the hashtags she had been using to mock someone she thought was beneath her, were all now evidence of her complete unprofessional conduct toward the person who owned the company that employed her. Tyler's voice was barely contained excitement as he provided commentary for his live audience. "Oh my God, y'all. This is the plot twist of the century. Did you hear that, Campbell Pharmaceuticals? That's the company that just got FDA approval for the Alzheimer's treatment. She's worth billions." Dr. Patricia Williams stepped forward, her medical professional training helping her maintain composure in the face of the revelation. "I think she said carefully that we all need to take a step back and reassess what just happened here." Morrison's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. He was staring at Sierra as if she had materialized from another dimension, his brain struggling to process the gap between what he had assumed and what was actually true. The young black woman in the hoodie, the person he had dismissed as a con artist and threatened with arrest, was his boss. She owned the plane, she owned the company, and she now held his entire future in her hands. Luis Martinez, the ground crew supervisor, stepped back and pulled out his radio. He had seen enough situations go wrong to know that this was about to become a much bigger issue than anyone had anticipated. "Control, this is Luis. We're going to need the airport manager at Gate 7. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." Amanda Foster was fumbling for her own phone, her socialite instincts telling her that she was witnessing something that would be talked about in her circles for years to come. She began filming, adding her angle to the multiple perspectives already documenting what was rapidly becoming the most expensive mistake in private aviation history. The revelation was complete, but the consequences were just beginning. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the aircraft and the distant hum of Tyler's live stream commentary. Morrison's face had cycled through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly green that made him look like he might vomit. His 20-year aviation career, his $350,000 salary, his reputation in the private charter industry, all of it was crashing down around him as he stared at the woman he had just threatened to have arrested. Ma'am Morrison finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, "I was just following security protocols. I was protecting the aircraft from unauthorized personnel." Sierra's expression remained completely neutral, the kind of calm that was somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. "What security protocol, Captain Morrison, authorizes you to physically block someone from their own property based solely on their appearance?" Morrison's mouth opened and closed as he searched for an answer that didn't exist. The truth was that there was no protocol for what he had done. His actions had been based on pure prejudice, on assumptions about what wealthy people looked like, and on the arrogant belief that his 20 years of experience gave him the right to make judgments about who belonged in first-class anything. "I didn't assault anyone," Morrison said desperately. I was escorting you to the proper area. I was trying to help you find where you needed to go." Dr. Patricia Williams stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had testified in courtrooms about medical facts. "Captain Morrison, I witnessed you physically grab Ms. Campbell's arm and attempt to remove her from the area. That's not escorting, that's assault." Tyler's live stream had reached 50,000 viewers, with comments flowing so fast they created a digital waterfall of shocked reactions. Aviation professionals around the world were commenting on the incident, sharing their own experiences with discrimination and expressing horror at the conduct they were witnessing. The hashtag aviation discrimination was beginning to trend alongside hashtag private jet justice. Isabella Vasquez was standing frozen in place, her perfectly applied makeup beginning to run slightly in the rain. She was staring at her phone, which was now displaying her own Instagram story from just minutes earlier. The video she had taken of Sierra, the mocking commentary she had provided, the hashtags she had used to humiliate someone she thought was beneath her were all still there, preserved forever, as evidence of her complete unprofessional conduct. "I didn't know." Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "How was I supposed to know who you were?" Sierra turned her attention to Isabella, her gaze steady and unforgiving. "You weren't supposed to know who I was, Ms. Vasquez. You were supposed to treat me with basic human respect regardless of who I was. That's what professionalism means." Isabella's hands were shaking as she realized the full implications of her situation. Her Instagram following her carefully curated image as a luxury flight attendant, her entire social media presence that had taken years to build, all of it, was about to be destroyed by her own documented behavior. The video she had taken was now evidence against her, shared and saved by thousands of people who had watched Tyler's live stream. Amanda Foster lowered her phone and stepped forward. "I owe you an apology, Ms. Campbell. I'm ashamed to admit that I initially agreed with the crew's assessment of the situation. I made assumptions based on appearance, and that was wrong." Sierra nodded acknowledgement toward Amanda, recognizing the courage it took to admit fault publicly. "Thank you for saying that, Miss Foster. That kind of honesty is how we begin to address these problems." Luis Martinez was speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating with airport management and security to contain a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's ability to control. "Yes, sir. We need the incident report team down here immediately, and someone needs to call Campbell Holdings Security Department." Morrison made one last desperate attempt to salvage his career. "Ms. Campbell, please. I have a family. I have a mortgage. I've been flying for 20 years without any incidents. This was just a misunderstanding. Surely we can work something out." Sierra's expression didn't soften. "Captain Morrison, you should have thought about your family and your mortgage before you decided that my appearance disqualified me from boarding my own aircraft. You should have considered the consequences before you put your hands on me in anger, and you should have remembered your professional obligations before you threatened to have me arrested for the crime of being black while boarding a private jet." Tyler had stopped providing commentary for his live stream, allowing his audience to witness the aftermath of the revelation without narration. The comments section was a mixture of celebration for justice being served, outrage at the discrimination that had been displayed, and aviation industry professionals discussing the broader implications of what they had witnessed. Sierra reached for her phone again and dialed another number. This call was answered immediately. "Campbell Holdings Executive Office. This is Sierra Campbell. I need you to contact Atlantic Aviation Management immediately. I want Captain Jake Morrison and Flight Attendant Isabella Vasquez terminated from their positions effective immediately. I also want them removed from the aircraft premises within the hour." "Yes, ma'am. Shall I initiate the standard termination procedures?" "Expedited termination. Security escort. And I want their access badges deactivated before they leave the tarmac." Morrison fell to his knees on the wet asphalt, the full weight of his destroyed career finally breaking through his defenses. 20 years of experience gone. His reputation in the aviation industry ruined. His financial security eliminated. All because he couldn't see past his own prejudice to treat another human being with basic respect. "Please," he begged. "Please don't do this. I'll do anything. I'll issue a public apology. I'll take sensitivity training. I'll work for free. Just please don't destroy my life over a mistake." Sierra looked down at the man who had threatened her with arrest just minutes earlier, who had physically blocked her from her own property, who had humiliated her in front of dozens of witnesses and thousands of live stream viewers. "Captain Morrison," she said, her voice carrying a finality that echoed across the tarmac. "This wasn't a mistake. This was your character revealed under pressure. And character is the only currency that truly matters. The consequences were swift, severe, and exactly as promised. Within 30 minutes of Tyler's live stream ending, his video had been downloaded, clipped, and reshared across every major social media platform. The original stream had peaked at over 100,000 concurrent viewers, but the clips were now reaching millions. TikTok users were creating reaction videos. Twitter was exploding with commentary from aviation professionals and civil rights advocates, and Instagram was flooded with reposts of Isabella's own footage turned against her. The hashtags, #PrivateJetJustice, #AppearanceBias, and #SierraStrong were trending globally within an hour. Aviation industry publications were already drafting articles with headlines like "Billionaire CEO Humiliated by Own Flight Crew and Private Aviation Discrimination Caught on Camera." Business news outlets were connecting Sierra's story to broader discussions about bias in luxury industries, and social media influencers were using the incident as a case study in how quickly privilege could turn into public humiliation. Tyler's follower count had jumped by over 500,000 in a single day as his original stream was shared and reshared across platforms. Aviation professionals were commenting on his video, sharing their own experiences with discrimination in the industry, and praising his documentation of what many called the most expensive case of racial profiling in private aviation history. His commentary during the live stream was being quoted in news articles and shared as evidence of how social media could serve as a tool for accountability. Isabella's carefully curated Instagram presence was collapsing in real time. The video she had taken to mock Sierra was being shared with commentary that highlighted her unprofessional conduct, her assumptions about wealth and status, and her complete failure to treat a passenger with basic respect. Her follower count wasn't just dropping, it was hemorrhaging. Luxury brands that had previously sent her products for promotion were quietly distancing themselves from her account. Airlines and charter companies were taking note of her name to ensure she never worked in the industry again. Dr. Patricia Williams had shared her own perspective on her medical professional networks, discussing the importance of intervening when witnessing discrimination and the courage required to speak up when authority figures abuse their power. Her account of the incident was being shared in medical journals and professional forums as an example of how bystanders could effectively intervene in discriminatory situations. Amanda Foster was dealing with her own reckoning within her social circles. The wealthy socialite community was buzzing with discussions about the incident, with many expressing shame about their own assumptions and behaviors. Amanda's honest admission of her initial prejudice was being shared as an example of how people with privilege could acknowledge their biases and work to address them. The aviation industry was scrambling to respond to the public relations nightmare that Tyler's video had created. Private charter companies were implementing new training programs, revising their customer service protocols, and issuing public statements about their commitment to treating all passengers with equal respect, regardless of appearance. The incident had exposed a culture of assumptions and prejudices that many in the industry preferred to keep hidden. Campbell Pharmaceutical's stock price jumped 12% in after-hours trading as Sierra's story spread across business news networks. Investors were responding positively to the demonstration of her character under pressure, her calm handling of a discriminatory situation, and her commitment to holding people accountable for their actions. The pharmaceutical breakthrough that had brought Sierra to Miami in the first place was getting additional media attention as reporters connected her professional success to her personal dignity. Jake Morrison was discovering that his termination was just the beginning of his problems. Aviation industry groups were discussing whether his conduct warranted investigation by the FAA for potential violations of passenger safety regulations. Legal experts were analyzing whether his physical contact with Sierra constituted assault, and whether his threats to have her arrested could be considered harassment or intimidation. His 20-year career wasn't just over. His ability to work anywhere in aviation was in serious jeopardy. Isabella Vasquez was facing similar consequences in the flight attendant community. Professional organizations were reviewing her conduct for potential violations of service industry standards. Her social media documentation of the incident was being used as evidence in discussions about professional behavior and the responsibilities that came with representing airlines and charter companies. Her influencer career was destroyed, her aviation career was over, and her personal brand was now synonymous with discrimination and unprofessional conduct. The incident was becoming a case study in business schools about the intersection of social media corporate responsibility and personal accountability. Professors were using Tyler's video to discuss how quickly situations could escalate in the age of live streaming, how assumptions about wealth and status could lead to career-destroying mistakes, and how authentic leadership looked when faced with discrimination and prejudice. Sierra's response to the discrimination was being analyzed and praised by leadership experts, civil rights advocates, and business professionals. Her calm demeanor under pressure, her methodical approach to revealing her identity, and her swift but proportionate response to the crew's conduct were being held up as examples of how to handle discrimination with dignity and effectiveness. The broader conversation about appearance bias in luxury industries was gaining momentum as other passengers shared their own experiences with being judged, dismissed, or discriminated against based on their clothing, race, age, or perceived economic status. The incident had opened a window into patterns of behavior that many people had experienced but few had been able to document so comprehensively. 1 week after the Opa-locka incident, Sierra Campbell stood in the boardroom of her Miami headquarters, looking out at the aviation industry executives who had requested an emergency meeting. News of the discrimination she had faced had spread throughout the private aviation community, creating a crisis of public confidence that threatened the entire industry's reputation. The room was filled with CEOs, fleet managers, training directors, and union representatives, all wanting to demonstrate their commitment to change. The incident at Opa-locka wasn't an isolated event. Sierra began her voice carrying the same calm authority that had been on display during the confrontation. It was a symptom of deeper issues within an industry that has allowed prejudice to masquerade as intuition and discrimination to hide behind the guise of security protocols. Within 48 hours of that meeting, Sierra had launched the Dignity in Aviation Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to address bias and discrimination throughout the private aviation industry. The initiative included mandatory bias training for all crew members, new protocols requiring staff to verify passenger credentials before making any assumptions, an anonymous reporting system for discrimination incidents, and regular audits of customer service practices across participating companies. 3 major private aviation companies adopted the Dignity in Aviation protocols within the first week, with smaller charter operators following quickly behind. The training program Sierra developed didn't just address racial bias. It tackled assumptions based on age, gender disability, sexual orientation, and economic appearance. The message was clear. Respect was not optional, and professionalism meant treating every passenger with dignity regardless of their appearance or perceived status. The anonymous reporting system revealed the scope of the problem within the industry. Passengers began sharing stories of discrimination they had experienced, but never reported crew members documented patterns of bias they had witnessed but felt powerless to address. And managers discovered that customer complaints they had dismissed as isolated incidents were actually part of broader patterns of discriminatory behavior. Sierra's personal journey to this moment of industry leadership had been shaped by every underestimation she had faced throughout her life. Growing up in foster care, she had learned early that people would judge her based on her circumstances rather than her potential. In college, professors had assumed she was in the wrong classroom when she showed up for advanced chemistry courses. In graduate school, lab partners had assumed she was a work-study student rather than a researcher. In boardrooms, investors had addressed questions to her white male assistants instead of to her directly. Each instance of being underestimated had taught Sierra that true power didn't come from forcing people to see your worth. It came from demonstrating your worth so clearly that their assumptions became irrelevant. The incident at Opa-locka had been painful, but it had also been an opportunity to turn a moment of personal discrimination into a catalyst for industry-wide change. The new crew assigned to Sierra's aircraft represented the kind of professionalism that should have been standard throughout the industry. Captain Elena Rodriguez was a 15-year aviation veteran with an impeccable safety record and a reputation for treating every passenger with equal respect, regardless of their appearance or background. Flight attendant Maria Santos brought warmth and professionalism to her role, focusing on passenger comfort and safety rather than making judgments about who deserved first-class treatment. When Sierra boarded her aircraft for the first time since the incident, she was wearing the same university hoodie and jeans that had triggered Morrison and Vasquez's discriminatory behavior. Captain Rodriguez greeted her professionally, confirmed the flight plan they had discussed, and made no comments about her appearance or clothing choices. Maria Santos offered her the same level of service she provided to every passenger, treating Sierra's preferences and requests with respect rather than surprise. The contrast was striking and emotional. Sierra realized that the incident at Opa-locka had been traumatic, not just because of the discrimination she had experienced, but because it had reminded her of every other time someone had decided she didn't belong somewhere based on her appearance. The professional treatment she received from her new crew wasn't special. It was how every passenger should be treated every time they stepped onto an aircraft. Jake Morrison's fall from grace had been swift and complete. Within days of his termination, word of his conduct had spread throughout the aviation community. Airlines that might have considered hiring an experienced captain were removing his applications from consideration before scheduling interviews. Charter companies were sharing his name on industry blacklists to ensure he couldn't find work with their competitors. His 20 years of experience meant nothing when balanced against documented evidence of discriminatory behavior. Morrison's personal reckoning was painful and public. Forced to confront the reality of his own prejudices, he entered counseling and began the difficult work of understanding how his assumptions about race, class, and appearance had led to the destruction of his career. His public apology, issued through his attorney, acknowledged the harm he had caused and accepted full responsibility for his actions, but it couldn't undo the damage to his reputation or his future prospects in aviation. Isabella Vasquez faced similar consequences in the flight attendant community and social media world. Her Instagram account, which had once been a source of income and influence, became a cautionary tale about the dangers of using privilege to mock people perceived as less fortunate. Brand partnerships evaporated, follower counts plummeted, and her name became synonymous with discrimination and unprofessional conduct. The broader impact of the incident extended far beyond the aviation industry. Tyler Rodriguez's documentation of the discrimination had become a case study in the power of social media to hold authority figures accountable. His live stream was being shown in journalism schools as an example of citizen reporting in business schools, as a case study in crisis management and in social justice organizations, as proof that individual actions could create widespread change. Dr. Patricia Williams had become an advocate for bystander intervention training, speaking at medical conferences about the importance of speaking up when witnessing discrimination. Her willingness to intervene during the incident at Opa-locka was being held up as an example of how professionals in all industries could use their status and voice to support people facing discrimination. Amanda Foster's honest acknowledgement of her own initial prejudices had sparked conversations in her wealthy social circles about bias privilege and the responsibility that came with economic advantages. Her experience had become a catalyst for difficult but necessary discussions about how assumptions about class and appearance affected interactions between people of different economic backgrounds. The emotional resolution for Sierra came not from revenge or retribution, but from transformation. The discrimination she had faced at Opa-locka had been turned into an opportunity to create lasting change that would prevent other passengers from experiencing similar treatment. The Dignity in Aviation initiative was expanding beyond private flying to include commercial airlines, airport services, and transportation industries. As someone who creates content about justice and dignity, this story hits different for me. I've spent 3 years bringing you stories about people who faced discrimination but turned it into transformation, and Sierra Campbell's story might be the most important one yet. What struck me wasn't just that she had the power to fire Morrison and Vasquez. It's that she used that moment to create lasting change that would protect other passengers from experiencing the same humiliation. I've read hundreds of stories about discrimination in luxury industries, but Sierra's response was unique. She didn't just want revenge, she wanted reform. She didn't just want to punish the people who wronged her, she wanted to prevent them from wronging anyone else. The Dignity in Aviation initiative that grew out of her experience at Opa-locka is now being adopted by transportation companies around the world, creating new standards for customer service that prioritize respect over assumptions. Here's what Sierra taught us, that I want you to remember. True power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need designer clothes or flashy jewelry or an entourage to validate its existence. True power shows up in a hoodie and changes the entire industry without raising its voice or losing its dignity. Sierra never had to prove she belonged on that aircraft. Morrison and Vasquez had to prove they deserved to work on it. And when they failed that test, the consequences were swift and permanent. But here's the deeper lesson that I think about every time I watch Tyler's footage of that incident. It shouldn't take being a billionaire to be treated with basic human respect. Every passenger, regardless of their net worth, deserves to board an aircraft without having their appearance judged or their credentials questioned based on racial prejudice. Every person, regardless of their economic status, deserves to be treated with dignity by people in positions of authority. The reason Tyler's live stream went viral wasn't just because of the dramatic revelation or the satisfying consequences. It went viral because millions of people recognized themselves in Sierra's experience. They had been judged by their appearance, dismissed by authority figures, or treated as if they didn't belong somewhere because of their race, age, gender, or economic status. Sierra's calm response to discrimination resonated because it showed how dignity could triumph over prejudice without compromise or apology. What I learned from covering this story is that every Tyler Rodriguez with a camera phone is changing how these situations play out. When people know they're being watched, when their actions are being documented, when their behavior will be preserved and shared, they think twice about their assumptions and their treatment of others. Social media isn't just entertainment. It's accountability. It's evidence. It's justice served in real time to a global audience. If you witness discrimination, document it. If you experience bias, report it. If you have privilege, use it to stand up for others like Dr. Patricia Williams did. And if you're in a position of authority like Morrison and Vasquez were, remember that the person you dismissed today might be the one writing your paycheck tomorrow. Character revealed under pressure is the truest measure of who someone really is, and that character is now preserved forever in the digital age. To my viewers who've been judged by your appearance before anyone knew your worth, your clothes don't determine your value. Your bank account doesn't define your dignity. Your appearance doesn't dictate your right to respect. You belong wherever you have the right to be, and you don't need to justify your existence to people who mistake their authority for actual power. And to anyone in a position of authority watching this, the uniform you wear, the badge you carry, the title you hold, none of that gives you the right to treat people as less than human based on assumptions about their background or economic status. The power you've been given is a responsibility, not a license for prejudice. Use it wisely because someone is always watching, someone is always recording, and consequences in the digital age are swift, severe, and permanent. That's why we tell these stories. Not for revenge, but for recognition. Not for drama, but for dignity. Because everyone deserves respect regardless of what they're wearing, where they came from, or what anyone assumes about their worth based on their appearance. What would you have done in Sierra's position? Do you think the consequences for Morrison and Vasquez were too harsh or exactly what they deserved for their discriminatory behavior? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I genuinely want to hear your perspective on this incredible story of justice served at 40,000 feet. Drop an airplane emoji if you've ever been underestimated because of how you looked, and tag someone who needs to be reminded that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or assumptions. Share this story with anyone who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong somewhere because of their appearance, their race, or their economic background. Subscribe for more stories where justice doesn't just happen, it transforms everything. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these incredible tales of dignity triumphing over discrimination and respect conquering prejudice. Like this video if Sierra's calm strength inspired you, and remember, stay humble or someone might just humble you from 40,000 feet above the ground where the view is crystal clear and the consequences are permanent.